VikesNow. I am Dustin Baker. We are 5 weeks away from free agency. Legal tampering actually starts on the Monday, the week of free agency, so less than 5 weeks. I'm here with my wonderful friend Josh Frey, who writes for VikingsTerritory.com, along with this guy. Josh, how's your week going?
It was going better till I got the Bucks news this morning. But other than that, I mean, football wise, it's going great. Diving into the draft a little bit more. Like you said, 5 weeks away from free agency. It's an exciting time.
I agree with you. Before we hop into the Vikings' most important positions to address this offseason, give me your quick reaction to the same day Myles Garrett saying, "Hey, I'm out of here. Please trade me." And I guess, the Rams telling Cooper Kupp that he'll be traded. What are your initial reactions to those two events?
My initial reaction to that, especially for the Garrett trade, it's excitement because some team out there is going to get a franchise caliber edge rusher that is inevitably going to change the landscape of the NFL. Like he's just kind of been rotting away in Cleveland over the past couple seasons, and his talents have kind of just gone uh, not unnoticed, but just underutilized in terms of competitive football. And I'm excited to see him get onto a contender this upcoming season and see what he can really do under the biggest spotlights in the NFL. I think the Buffalo Bills would be an interesting landing spot for him. Obviously, the Minnesota Vikings would be fun, but I just don't see that actually happening just because of how much depth that the Vikings have at edge rusher right now. If they didn't have one of Jonathan Grenard or Andrew Van Ginkel under contract this upcoming season, I could see them maybe taking a swing at it. But with how things stand heading into 2025, I don't see that happening. But Cooper Kupp, it seems like he's getting a raw deal. Like they
Hmm.
just they're trying to trade him away, and he just coming out with the statement like, "Hey, I want to retire here. I don't
Hmm.
agree with this move," and it kind of sucks to see a guy that was a crucial part of a championship run. And this morning, I got some I saw some sentimental feelings myself for the Chris Middleton trade. But yeah, with Cooper Kupp, it just sucks that he's not going to finish in LA because that's where he started. That's where he really blossomed into the star that he's become. And yeah, I was hoping that we'd be able to see him get a fit little fairy tale ending with that squad.
And with Cup, when you say integral, it was effing integral because he
Yeah.
was the offensive player of the year they won the Super Bowl, and by the way, Super Bowl MVP, which is rare for a non-quarterback to win it. Any um desire or lean that Cup could end up with the Vikings?
That would be interesting. I mean, it would depend on cost, obviously. Like I'm not trading away a first round pick for him, especially if I'm the Vikings when you got Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison under contract. But I mean, yeah, depending on the price, I'd look at it at the very least. I wouldn't just hang up the phone right away. Because I mean, the Rams are shopping him. He's what, 32, something like that,
He will
heading
be
into 20.
32.
Yeah, heading
Hmm.
into 2025. So it's not like they're going to be getting a king's ransom for this guy at this point. But yeah, wide receiver three, Cooper Kupp, sign me up if the Vikings can get it at the right price.
This is fascinating for the Vikings because it's a very obvious tie to Kevin O'Connell, who was the
Yeah.
offensive coordinator for the Rams. That's why I'm even talking about it in general. And then what's the second one? There was another. Oh, Jordan Addison will likely be suspended
Ah,
for 2 or 3 games to
that's true
start the
too.
season. And the Rams have shown in the past that they're willing to eat some of the salary to facilitate a trade. So, my estimation, even though we learned over the weekend in the NBA, trades are not an exact science. I'm going to guess he
Uh,
goes for a fourth rounder. Or maybe one of those pick swap deals, kind of like the Hawkinson trade. So I think it's a reasonable play for the Vikings to get him. And I am not of the opinion that Cooper Kupp is washed by any shape.
no.
I think that he's one of those guys that can play for about 2 or 3 more years, get 800, 900 yards per season, which is what the Vikings have lacked from a WR3 for a very long time. We get excited when a dude gets 600 yards, like Osborne or Jalen Naylor in that case, 400, 500 yards. So keep Cooper Kupp to the Vikings on your radar because of those ties to the Rams. That's the perk in having a coach like Kevin O'Connell. All right, let's start at the bottom of your list for the most important positions for the Vikings to address this offseason. When we get to number one here in about 15, 20 minutes, that will be the most important need. What do you got at number five?
Number five, and you could probably argue that there are other positions that are more important than this one, but I'm putting inside linebacker here, just because the Vikings just have zero depth at this point at that position. You got Ivan Pace, you got Blake Cashman under contract for 2025, and that's about it. Other than Brian Asamoah, who's hasn't played over 40 snaps on defense in the past 2 seasons. So I would be pretty shocked if they're content riding with him as the LB3 heading into 2025. But and you take into account that both Pace and Cashman had injury issues this past season that threw Kamu Grugier-Hill into the starting lineup for a bit, and not to mention the impact on defense, but Grugier-Hill also was second on the team in special team snaps in
Mm-hmm.
2024. So that's a key hole that you're going to need to fill this upcoming offseason. Obviously, you could probably just bring him back, but it'd be interesting to see them maybe go dip into the offseason and try to find somebody else to play that position. If we're specifically going to look at the draft here, I think Chris Paul Jr. is an interesting fit here. Not Chris Paul, the NBA player's son, unfortunately. That would have been really funny. But this is a guy 6'1", like 240. He's built like a tank. And he definitely he has some issues in coverage at this point, but he can hang with the tight ends on vertical routes, stuff like that. He's got the athleticism to do that. It'd be a very interesting fit with the Vikings, I think.
The cool part about possibly needing an off-ball linebacker from the draft is you can kind of get them wherever you'd like.
Yep.
They're one of those spots that if you get them in round 4 or round 5, it's not weird for one of those guys to blossom. Pretty rare for off-ball linebackers to go in the first round. Another name to keep an eye on a free agency is Jerome Baker. He has
Mm-hmm.
ties to Brian Flores from the Miami days, and he is no longer a starter, at least per his recent resume. So he could fit in wonderfully if they want to back up Ivan Pace and Blake Cashman. Is your formal prediction I don't even know if we'll have a fourth rounder, but a mid-round draft pick for the Vikings? Or do you think they get a Jerome Baker with a sweet last name, by the way?
I think it would probably end up being a fifth round pick. I just don't see them spending huge amounts of money on a free. I'm looking at the free agent list right now, and there's
Hmm.
not a ton that's necessarily popping off the screen. And obviously, it's a backup linebacker. You don't need a guy that's going to pop off the screen, but
Yeah.
maybe like a Willie Gay Jr. from New Orleans would be an interesting fit in free agency as well. But yeah, I would guess that if they want to really try to go get an LB3, it would probably be fifth round of the draft, just because one, linebackers typically aren't ready to play right away out of the
Yeah.
draft, regardless. Like we saw that with Nakobe Dean in Philadelphia. It took him a couple years for him to really pop off there. And like you said, they're typically available that late in the draft, so it'd be pretty easy to find one.
Yep. So we're looking at Ivan Pace, Blake Cashman, habitually in the middle of the defense, probably Grugier or Hill, like you mentioned, back. And then I'm guessing they cut Asamoah because they just don't use him. And then somebody like Jerome Baker,
Mhm.
or somebody mid to late rounder. Because the Vikings actually do have 2 fifth-round picks. That's one spot where they actually got some draft picks. All right. Inside linebacker, off-ball linebacker, whichever verbiage you want to use. What's number 4?
Number four, you could put this higher or lower depending on how you feel, but defensive tackle. We've talked about this over the past few weeks, but I don't see it as it's definitely a need if the Vikings are going to build a Super Bowl contender in 2025, but I don't see it as an overwhelming need to where you need to use your first round pick. You absolutely need to go get one of the top guys in free agency to fill this spot because Brian Flores has done it before. He's filled a defense that didn't have a star defensive tackle, other than you want to say the borderline star in Harrison Phillips at that
Hmm.
position. And then it's pretty much just been swing guys, fill in roles ever since then. But I mean, it's definitely a need, but I don't see it as a huge one. The Vikings could potentially go into the first round and get a defensive tackle, but I just don't see it as a huge need. If they were to go get one later on in the draft, I'm going to pull up my list here really quick. It's maybe a guy like Derek Harmon. We've talked about him as a potential first round guy. I don't know if I necessarily see him going that high, but if the Vikings were to trade down and maybe they use their comp pick in the third round to get him, maybe they use a late second round, something like that to get him. And again, they don't have a second rounder at this point, so it's kind of hard to predict exactly what they're going to do with that. But maybe a Darius Alexander, a guy out of Toledo, the same school that Quinion Mitchell came out of last season. That'd be an interesting fit for the Vikings. I think he's a guy that's kind of gone under the radar through this draft process. But yeah, I think that that's kind of where I'm eyeing their comp pick at this point because maybe I'm just spacing, but I'm just not thinking of a ton of huge defensive tackle names that are coming up. Well, DJ Jones would be probably one of the top ones, or BJ Hill. But
Hmm.
there's no like Christian Wilkins like there was last year in this free agency class.
Yep, there are mid-tier decent players available in free agency, not like last year when you had about seven dudes that were like, holy shit, we can get him.
Right.
This year they have Puna Ford, Jaron Reed, some of those big body type guys that can be gettable with Kwesi's 60 million as of early February. Um, and you want a big body guy, correct?
I would love a big body guy just to fill up some space in the middle and really commit to stopping the run.
Hmm. If they don't listen to you and they go with my way and more of a three tech, do you think Walter Nolan will be available at 24?
That's going to be tricky. I think that one of him or Kenneth Grant out of Michigan will probably be available at 24. I don't know necessarily. The thing that worries me is the fact that the Chargers pick at 22, and
Hmm.
if Kenneth Grant is still on the board, I think that Jim Harbaugh is taking him. That's the problem with taking a defensive tackle in the first round for me right now. Is like I think Walter Nolan could be available, but I also think that he's got the talent to go a touch higher than that, and then Kenneth Grant's going to the Chargers if he's available into the 20s. So
Okay.
that's my hang up with drafting a defensive tackle in the first round at this point. They certainly could, but I just don't see it happening.
Okay. If the Vikings address this spot and don't just roll with Jonathan Bullard and Vikings legend now Jalen Redmond, who's a badass, will they fix this in free agency or will they use a draft pick?
I think they probably go to free agency. I think if they're go, I think they obviously got money to spend, and I hope that they just use it to fill up the trenches.
Okay.
I think those two spots. I think you can feasibly say that they can spend money at those two spots this offseason, and be set to go in 2025 and use your picks to fill other holes at this point. But yeah, that's where I would go.
There was, I think it was ESPN or Bleacher Report this week recommended a trade by the Vikings, like a 2026 third rounder for DeForest Buckner. It would be like one of those. I mean, it wasn't like this is going to happen. It's like what Bleacher Report would do type thing. And that guy is as consistent as there is, like
Mhm.
never has below 75 PFF. So that would be fascinating if Buckner is for sale. When I read that, I was like, why the hell would the Colts sell Buckner? We shall see. All right, what's number three on your list? Important off-season priority positions.
Number three, and this is one that, depending on what happens with Aaron Jones, could go up or down again. But running back, I think that the Vikings, obviously, Aaron Jones is a fine player at the running back position. I think he had a fine season. I think people are a bit overreacting to some of what I mean, he was still a 1,000 yard rusher. I think he had his career high in yards from scrimmage of the season, actually, with the Vikings, which was pretty surprising. But I mean, at the end of the day, it was just one thing after another with this guy in terms of injuries. And I just want to see the Vikings with a healthy backfield for the first time, basically since 2020 at
Hmm.
this point, maybe 2021. But yeah, I think that it's it seems like given what happened with Dalvin Cook after there were signs that he was starting to drop off, I think that the Vikings are probably going to part ways with Aaron Jones. Again, maybe I'm wrong about that. Maybe they love Aaron Jones and his locker room presence, but he's just not a big dude. And I think that the Vikings, again, can go get a guy in the draft and they can fill that hole if they really want to get younger at that position and while bringing back a guy like Cam Akers to fill in that RB2 role. We've talked about pretty much everybody on this list at this point, but if Marion Hampton would be an interesting fit. Cam Scatterbo is my guy. I'm going to keep pounding the table for him in the third round. But I mean, yeah, I hope that they don't spend a ton of money on running back position in free agency and probably go get a guy in the draft. But Rico Dowdle would be an interesting fit. I wouldn't hate taking a shot at J.K. Dobbins,
Hmm.
depending on what the money looks like there either. I mean, there's a world where he's expensive because he was really good this season for the Chargers. But there's also the injury history that could bring his price tag down a little bit. So I think that would be an interesting fit in free agency.
Yeah, that's my problem with Aaron Jones coming back because I really did enjoy how he stabilized the position. So if
Mhm.
if they do, which is a reasonable possibility, if they sign Aaron Jones back and they go get Quinton Judkins or somebody, I will be elated. Let's get that out there. However, based on Aaron Jones, he's going to get one of those lifetime achievement contracts where it's like 1 year, 7 million.
Right.
And I would rather not. I would rather them get somebody like Javonte Williams, who is 6 years younger than Aaron Jones, and pay him $5 million. So I'm looking at it from dollars and cents, but I want the record to show that I do enjoy Aaron Jones and his consistency. Guy played every game, even though there was always something wrong with him. And then you mentioned Dalvin Cook. I have to point this out. He is the almighty fall off a cliff at age 28 running back. Like, my goodness,
Right.
he had the last hurrah in 2022, which even we could see signs of, like, this isn't the same guy. But my goodness, like, we get skittish as fantasy football managers with running backs at age 28 or so, and that guy wrote the textbook on becoming a non-factor like the moment he hit 28. So, kudos to Aaron Jones for still cooking at age 30. He's going to be 31, I believe, this coming season. All right, so it
Yep.
seems like we have the endorsement to get a free agent like Rico Dowdle. I like Javonte Williams. Najee Harris is also pretty consistent, although not very electric. But I don't know any Vikings fan that does not want to draft a rookie running back. Somebody tweeted, maybe Jordan Reed, that this draft has like 30 running backs with a draftable grade. So the Vikings
It's
could end up with two.
Yeah, it is very deep, and yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if they ended up taking two, just because they need to find some sort of future at that position. And like you said, it could be going and getting a guy in free agency, but the cheapest way to do it is go getting two mid-tier guys in this draft later in the fifth to seventh round or whatever, and hoping that they both stick. But yeah, I think it's a very deep class at the running back position.
And they
Very intriguing.
and they got to sign Cam Akers back so we don't trade for him in October. That's my only ask.
Exactly.
And because Akers had the pass against the Packers, which turned out to be like the last good moment of the Viking season, where he scooped it off the ground, that guy sold me for life. Bring him back as RB3 for $2 million, whatever it is. All right, number two on your list before we have the grand reveal.
Number two is the interior offensive line. You could throw guard, you could throw center in there. I think I'd personally say that guard is a bigger need at this point for the Vikings than center, just because Garrett Bradbury's fine. He's not great at all, but I mean, it's also he's on his last year of his deal. I wouldn't be surprised to just let him play it out, because I've mentioned this before, but I just don't feel great about throwing a rookie center into the mix with basically a
Mhm.
rookie quarterback and hoping that that just works out for you as you try to open up this Super Bowl window in 2025. I just don't love that fit. So I do kind of think that they're just going to ride it out with Bradbury unless they can go get a veteran in free agency. But for guard, I think right guard is just an absolute need for this team heading into 2025 if they really want to compete. Trey Smith is the big name. I'm still gonna hold out hope that they just use a big chunk of that cap space and go get this guy and solidify that spot for the first time for the next 4 or 5 years. And again, I don't really love this draft class in terms of interior offensive linemen. Tyler Booker is an interesting name that has been thrown out there as a potential first round guy, but with the next need that we're going to talk about, I just don't see them using this first round pick on a guard at this point. So I just hope that they go get Trey Smith and lock this thing down.
All right, let me ask you this then. Yannick Eckhart's on this show about once a month. He told me that he'd be pretty shocked if they moved on from Garrett Bradbury because of his dependability. That makes me roll my eyes. I want to be done with the era of, oh my God, we're playing the Giants. Oh, we're playing the Packers. Kenny Clark, our guy's gonna get mauled. I can't wait for that era to
Yeah.
be over. Probably not this year. But would you rather have as the interior offensive line Trey Smith, Garrett Bradbury, and Blake Brandel, or Brandon Scherf, Blake Bradbury, and Tevin Jenkins? Because you can probably get two guards for the price of Trey Smith. What would you rather have?
I think I'd rather just get Trey Smith, just because I
Okay.
know for sure that he's going to be awesome at that right guard spot. And I think he can kind of take some of the pressure off of Bradbury that we haven't seen a ton of at that right guard spot over the past few years. So I think I'd rather have the Trey Smith, but I wouldn't be upset with either one at this point, just because I know that Tevin Jenkins, Brandon Scherf are going to be at least suitable starters, and they've actually
Hmm.
played their positions before, unlike Blake Brandel and unlike Dalton Risner, who switched over to right guard for the first time in his entire life this season.
Hmm.
So I wouldn't be upset with either one, but I just want to get a bona fide star in there
Yeah.
at one of those spots.
And I only chose Scherf's name because it came to the top of my mind. There's also Will Fries,
Right.
who kind of busted out even though he was never really good until this year. And then like Mekhi Becton from the Jets. There are
Hmm.
multiple guards, none are as good as Trey Smith. But the way Kwesi usually does business, it seems more likely to me that he spends 10 million apiece on two guards rather than Trey Smith. But he's never had this type of piggy bank before to spend. What about like I want to be done with Bradbury. Let's get the just like I want to say I like Aaron Jones. I want Bradbury to go elsewhere. But I don't want a rookie like you said. So Drew Dahlman would be my primary free agent target above all else. But I also know that he's going to be sought after by at least a half dozen teams. What's the realism of Drew Dahlman coming to the Vikings? Surefire commodity at center.
I think it's at least a decent shot. I mean, he's gonna get a sizable contract. So I think you sign Drew Dahlman, it definitely takes you out of the running for Trey Smith, at least in my mind, because I mean, this dude's 26 and he's already one of the better centers in this entire league. So I think that would kind of take you out of the running. But then, like you said, you can still go get a couple of other veteran pieces at guard too. So I wouldn't hate that. I just I kind of want to see. I do kind of want to see what JJ McCarthy can do with this with Bradbury there, and then
Hmm.
if it really doesn't work out, then maybe you go draft a guy next year. I obviously have absolutely no idea what the center class looks like for next year yet. But
Yeah.
I also I just don't want to overspend money on a luxury kind of deal when,
Hmm.
like you said, Bradbury's fine. He's not the greatest pass protector in the world, but he is at least a serviceable run blocking presence in the interior of the offensive line. And I think that's, especially if you go get a rookie running back this year, I think that's going to be very important to have at least a serviceable run blocker in the middle of your offensive line. So I wouldn't spend too much on a center that's a luxury kind of need at this point when you can just play it out with Bradbury
Yeah.
this year and go get a guy next season.
There's also an element that I'm probably going to end up saying over and over this offseason, but it's still a tender spot where we can't say it out loud. The Vikings offensive line was not bad on the
No,
whole in 2024. The last two games, Sam Darnold turned into a pile of shit. And then the offensive line was blamed as well because they weren't good. But on the whole, the Vikings had like a top 12 offensive line, even with Cam Robinson coming in at left tackle. So we're going to forget about that because we have the memory of 9 sacks in the playoffs. But we're not starting from zero like we often did in a Zimmer
right.
offseason. I have to point that out.
And
Uh,
I,
mhm.
I I do think that like the fact that Philadelphia's offensive line got absolutely mauled by LA's defensive front in that game too. I think that kind of should have opened some eyes to, hey, we don't need to panic yet. We don't need to completely flip out and overhaul this entire thing yet. Like it was fine. This LA defensive front is just absolutely star-studded at this point. And kudos to them for going and
Yeah.
nailing their draft picks after Aaron Donald retired.
Yeah, and they actually get to use their draft picks. It's wild how that works out.
Yeah.
On Drew Dahlman, I've seen a lot of credible Falcons fans and writers kind of react to his possible exit the way we do to Byron Murphy. Like, hey, he ain't going anywhere. So I don't know that Dahlman will ever hit the open market. There's also this period that's coming up soon where all these sweet free agents we're talking about, they just sign back with their teams, and we're like,
Right.
oh, there goes the top 10 of the top 50 list. And then the other final point on offensive line I want to make is that during the O'Connell era, albeit brief with the Rams, their interior offensive line was usually pretty damn anonymous. Like they didn't have Trey Smiths and those types of dudes. So there's a pedigree there of maybe not running it back, but not completely overhauling it because the Rams certainly didn't have absolute gangbusters at guard and center during their Super Bowl run. Prediction on the offensive line. What does it look like week 1, September?
I mean I think it's Trey Smith. I think
Really?
that
Okay.
Kwesi finally opens up his piggy bank and goes out and gets a big name at that right guard spot. I at least that as for the Vikings' sake, I hope that's what happens.
Yeah.
Just because yeah, like I said, I just want there to be a bona fide. I just want that position to be settled and done. And so we don't have to keep talking about it every single offseason.
That'll be the biggest Vikings offensive guard acquisition since Steve Hutchinson about
Yeah.
2 decades ago, believe it or not. All right, we already know what it is. If you watch this show, what is the Vikings' most important position need and how will they fix it as a prediction?
And it's that cornerback spot still. And I mean, obviously, re-signing Byron Murphy would take a lot of the heat off of this spot, but I still think you need to go get another serviceable starting caliber player. Because I mean, it's Mekhi Blackman, Dwight McGlothern, and that's about it, unless you turn
You don't like
something.
Reddy Stewart?
I don't know anything about Reddy Stewart, so maybe I will by the time training camp rolls around. But or maybe they turn Jay Ward into something of a slot corner because he definitely did a lot of that at LSU. But we haven't seen him. We just haven't seen him do it yet. So there's just a ton of questions with this Viking secondary. Like there's some bodies, but we haven't seen them produce at all at the NFL level. So I think Byron Murphy definitely is the number one way to fix this. And I think it's the easiest way to fix the secondary heading into 2025, just keeping your guy around for the next 3, 4 years. But yeah, I think if you're going to keep that first round pick, I think you got to go a corner. I just think that there's too many names out there that are going to be available. And I mean, we've talked about it, but the biggest question mark with a lot of these guys is just health between Benjamin Morrison's hip and the Siobhan Revell and his ACL tear that he had this past season. But both are, when they're on the field and when they're healthy, they're outstanding players. And I think that injury is going to knock them down the board a little bit, unless that they just get absolutely cleared by the time the combine rolls around. But I think both of those names probably are available at 24. Another name would be Trey Amos. I think he's a very solid out boundary guy, and he can step into the slot, I think, as well. So I think you can add some versatility there too. But yeah, I just hope if they stick and pick at 24, it's a corner this upcoming offseason.
Because you have nominated this as the top off-season need, which isn't surprising, we all do. I'm gonna put your feet to the fire to predict the identity of the player who is the solution next to Byron Murphy. Will it be DJ Reed, a free agent, Travarius Ward, a free agent, Asante Samuel, a free agent, Benjamin Morrison, Notre Dame, Siobhan Revell Jr., East Carolina, Jade Barron, Texas, or is it Troy or Tori Amos? What's his name?
It is Trey Amos.
Trey
Yeah.
Amos,
Yep.
Oklahoma.
Ole Miss.
Ole Miss. Which one of those guys, when we're doing the show May 1st, will we be hyping up as the dude?
I think it's gonna be Siobhan Revell, just because I feel a lot better about fixing a knee injury at this point in medical science than I do about fixing a hip,
Yeah.
especially at the cornerback position. So I think that Morrison's hip injury, especially if he's not fully cleared over the next few weeks, is going to scare a lot of teams off, and I think the Vikings end up taking Siobhan Revell.
There's also a good chance because the Vikings finally have so much money with this post-competitive rebuild that they fix cornerback and then draft one. So you could
Yep.
be looking at Byron Murphy, Asante Samuel, and they're telling us we're good, and then we're chilling draft night. Boom, Siobhan Revell is in your living room as the Vikings draft pick.
I mean, it happened last year with Dallas Turner.
Yep.
Nobody expected the Vikings to trade up again and go get an edge rusher after they signed Grenard and Van Ginkel, and here they are. They've got an absolutely loaded edge rusher room. Maybe the same thing happens this upcoming April.
Yeah, it's very possible we're because JJ McCarthy, we're crossing our almighty fingers as the QB1 in September. We have this very precious 4 years to be luxurious with the way we spend the money until hopefully McCarthy is a top 10 dude, and then he'll get his 75 million by that time. All right, final question for you. It is not football related, but I have to ask you. I am a LeBron James fan. I have since the moment Michael Jordan retired from the Wizards in 2003. I looked around and said, I need a guy. And LeBron James was all the rage. I picked him. That man has not disappointed me. I need to know from you after the Luka Doncic trade, can the Lakers win a championship this year?
Um, I think it'll be very tough to win a championship this year, but I mean, when you got LeBron James and you got Luka Doncic on the same roster, anything is possible. Regardless of whatever excuse the Mavericks want to throw out there, like, oh, he's not conditioning well enough, oh, he's a locker room cancer, whatever.
He's
I
a
don't buy into either one of those because the dude's averaging a 30-point triple double, basically. Like any excuse that the Mavericks throw out there is just poo poo. Get that out of here. The dude's incredible. He's a top 5 player in the NBA, and he's 25 years old. So I think the Lakers definitely can win a championship this year.
I think it was when it was all said and done, their reasoning, although they didn't say it the way I'm about to, it was that he was a fat drunk who didn't want to sign a long-term extension, all which have been debunked by our very eyes. There's no way that guy weighs 270. I don't think he has an alcohol problem because he wouldn't be able to post a 33-point triple double nightly, and then he very vividly told the world that he would have signed in Dallas to get his supermax deal. Why wouldn't he?
I yeah, we spent the entire Saturday night trying to unhash this trade, and it just, every time I think about it, it's just what the hell is going on, and what is in the water between Jerry Jones and now the Mavericks? Like the arguably the worst two-run franchises in the entire sports world are residing in Dallas at this point, and it's just it sucks if you're a Dallas fan, but
Yeah,
yeah,
there could have been three more first rounders added on to that deal. And A, I would have been like, oh, yeah, that's the price. I get it. And B, I still would have been excited. That is how
yeah.
outrageous it was. I like you cannot predict or even forecast trades in the NFL or the NBA because there's never like this set rubric by which teams operate.
I mean, the fact that Rudy Gobert went for like five first rounders to the to the Timberwolves, and now Luka Doncic is going to the Lakers for one, like, yeah, that's
Yeah,
the
every time you
NBA,
think you
man.
got the NBA, anytime you think you got a trade figured out, like here's how much, like, I was just talking about who was it I said was going to cost a fourth rounder? Cooper Cup. That
Mhm.
could end up being a conditional seventh, or it could be
Yeah.
like the 31st pick in the draft. It's so
Mhm.
weird how there's no exact science. All right, my friend, we'll be back next week to chat about, we'll see what the topic of the week is then. Any closing arguments before we log off?
Not really. I just hope that we get Byron Murphy back on this roster over the next couple weeks, and then yeah, I'm excited. I this the Senior Bowl was fun to watch over the past week, and I'm excited to see the Combine coming up in a few weeks as well. So
What
it's an exciting time.
Shrine Bowl, that's your thing, right?
It was no Senior Bowl is kind of the one that I pay more attention to, but there were a few more big names at the Shrine Bowl,
Yeah,
especially over the past
last
couple
year,
years.
yeah, you were pounding Shrine Bowl or Senior Bowl over Combine, correct?
Yeah, I think
Yeah,
both are more important than the
yeah.
combine, just because I like to see guys in pads rather than just running around in shorts. I think you get a lot more out of that, but I think that this year in particular, there are a couple guys where I think if they test well athletically, or like especially in like Benjamin Morrison or Siobhan Rivell, if those two guys even show up and they get medically cleared to
Hmm.
do anything, I think that boosts their draft stock. So it's an interesting year in terms of both sides of the coin.
Yeah, I hear you. All right, my dude, we'll talk to you in 1 week, okay?
Sounds good. See you
All
then.
right, later.